Welcome to Wandering But Not Lost, your online source for finding balance so that you can align, connect, and prosper.
I'm living right here and now, and I don't want to miss out. Is this what life's all about? The world is calling and I'm listening. Yeah, I'm listening.
And now your hosts, Jen O'Brien and Matt Emerson.
Welcome to the Wandering But Not Lost podcast, everyone, where real estate and reality meet. It's episode 101. Jan O'Brien, what do we have going on today?
Well, we got our video working after 20 minutes and Jan figuring out that it was her microphone switch was off.
Yeah, and I don't have the giggles like I had last week, so it wasn't as funny today.
Okay, whatever. We've been doing this. It's not our first time on this technology thing, but you know what? Check the simple things, people. Check the simple things if you're going to start diving in.
Yeah.
But we're in episode 101 of the WBNL podcast. Check the show notes out over at WBNLpodcast.com. Here's what we're covering today. My topic is going to be the HyperLocal newsletter. More on that in a minute. And then Matt just sent me what he was going to talk about. I have a little idea, but I've never heard of this. And it's the Wandering USPHS Hospital number 43 at Ellis Island.
Quite mysterious, isn't it?
Apparently something you did on your last trip to the Big Apple.
That's right. I was going to say that was one of the best tours I have ever been on.
No way. And all
Period. Yep. It was really fascinating.
Well, I'm excited to hear about that. So, all right, let's dive in and let me talk about I'm kind of excited about talking about this because I'm actually maybe doing this a little bit premature because we're going to do this exactly what I'm going to talk about today. And I don't have an example, but we will be creating a newsletter of everything that I'm going to talk about today. And so I'll go back and fix the show notes so you guys can see some examples. Matt, I'm going to need your help on this, but I'm excited about creating we're going to talk a little bit about newsletters we already do, but I want to do a very specific real estate newsletter for our team. Okay. Awesome. So let's jump in. Oh, I'm waiting for the music. Okay, so you guys that are watching on video, Matt, you don't even have to edit this because we have to figure out how I'm so used to a year and a half of listening to the bumper music that sets me up for our next piece. And then Matt and I are just basically looking at chatting with each other, and there's no music, and it makes me a little bit sad.
You're listening to the Wandering But Not Lost podcast, where real estate and reality meet. Join us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and now on YouTube.
Welcome to the real estate tip of the week in episode 101, and I'm going to talk about this HyperLocal newsletter. So if you are a listener and you've heard or you know me and you're a local real estate person here, you know I like to talk about this thing called a local business spotlight. And that is a part of what I'm going to do in this newsletter. But what I mean by HyperLocal newsletter is this. It's an electronic or a print newsletter that you send to your client base monthly that contains compelling, interesting, fun content that is not all boring real estate. Real estate sprinkled in there, but it needs to be about your hyper-local community. So it's not all of Las Vegas, it's the area you service. So if I'm talking about Las Vegas, so if you service Henderson or you service Summerlin or you're in whatever city you're in and you're in a neighborhood, it's a what's the word I'm looking for? Not subdivision, but when you're in the outskirts of the major city.
Suburb?
Yes, that was the sub word I was looking for. Thank you. If that's the suburb or even a community that you service, it's all about that. Remember, we're always about niche marketing here and trying to not be all things to all people. So when I say hyper-local, it's like sharing cool things to do in your neighborhoods or your community. So let me get into what all that is. So it's a blend of community, neighborhood, lifestyle, so that people actually want to read it. Nobody just wants to open up and go, here's some listings, okay, or here's the market update. People are interested in that, but I think if you blend it with current events and other things that are happening, and then you let people know about it, more people will look at this every month. You'll stay top of mind because it's compelling content. All right, so that's what it is. Now, what can you do to create this newsletter? The very first thing I'm going to say is check out your CRM. Here at Home Connect America, we chose to use KV Core by Inside Real Estate. And only in the last maybe 5 months or so ago, they added the perfect solution to this newsletter, which is an advanced HTML newsletter. Matt, you've worked with that now and pretty easy to use, but you've also, the other two, if you don't have a CRM, that has the ability to create a branded newsletter or an HTML newsletter that you can add graphics and video, then use MailChimp or Constant Contact, right? And we've used MailChimp right now.
Really, the infrastructure is really pretty much the same. It's drag and drop type of stuff where you can really modify and create anything you want to. Video, images, buttons, anything really. It's pretty easy, user friendly.
So we use MailChimp. Matt creates our company newsletter that we send out monthly, a similar idea for a real estate brokerage where we put interesting things in the newsletter. So we'll put a sample of that. Can you put that up in the show notes, basically a snapshot of our last newsletter, pieces of it just to say what we're doing, and it will get the ideas across that I'm talking about, how you can integrate video, you can break it up with visuals and graphics and so forth. And that's why it can't just be a text-based, boring newsletter.
Right.
It really has to be an HTML newsletter that will help you, get people to catch their eyes because it has video and graphics in it. All right, so let's talk a little about layout ideas. All right, so I just said always use graphics, some cool images or photos, but definitely video. I think embedded video in the newsletter is going to get people to really want to take a look and click at it. There always has to be some calls to action. So calls to action are always those things that say, go search for homes, contact me for a market analysis or a home valuation, or we have like a new homes database. So you want to go search for new homes, click here. So there has to be something like that's going to drive people to your website or to anything else that you're using for your business. Of course, you're going to spotlight some listings or you could spotlight an area of town. All these websites, if you're using anything like Boomtown or Real Geeks, or as we use KV Core, they all have the ability to create compelling links that are dynamic, that are all the homes under 300,000 in such and such place, right? So you could spotlight a neighborhood. So you could spotlight a neighborhood where you maybe go take a driving tour and a video, and here's what's going on. It could be a neighborhood you farm, and then you could have the stats in there, and then you could do something like, here, click here for all the available listings. Okay, so that's the idea around the real estate content. Now, what do you do to make it more interesting and not so boring? Well, this is where you do things like a market update I also mentioned, I think. Now we talk about this local business spotlight. So without getting into all the details of that, we'll put a link to the podcast that we did last year on that. But the 1-minute version of the local business spotlight is this. You choose one business, maybe somebody in your database, once a month. You go interview them, do a video. You get them to provide some kind of a promotion, like if it's a restaurant or a coffee shop, or if they provide some service like pool service or whatever. Get them to offer a Groupon kind of an idea. Mm-hmm. And then you promote that to your database and say, here is our local business. Again, this is not like a chain. We're not going to the Home Depot or even a Starbucks. We're going to the cool mom and pop coffee shop to promote their local business, right? I always bring up a coffee shop, Matt knows, because that's why he's smiling, because I am going to tell this story right now. So I have been a house / cat sitter for the Emersons in the past.
True.
And so I'm like going exploring, and they go on their vacation, and I was happily taking care of their little babies because I got to be in California, right? And I discovered this coolest coffee place. It's right down the street from you, around the corner from where the Starbucks is. And I don't believe you've ever been in it.
I actually have. Since the last time we've been, I actually didn't buy any coffee, but I was at the post office, which is right there. And I went around the corner and said, I better go and look in this because Jen O'Brien talks to Ray, but it's actually really cool in there.
And this is just a thing for me. If you follow me on Instagram or anything, I actually have a highlight on coffee spots, right? Because it's cool. I like to try coffees in places. I'm drinking my cold brew right now, as a matter of fact. Let me have a sip. I am totally into this. I can't tell you the last time I had a cup of hot coffee. It's always about a cold brew. Yes, it's wonderful.
I am not a cold brew fan.
Anyway, I, of course, would be then doing local business spotlights on coffee houses because people like to hang out. It's the new kind of cool place to go do your work and so on. But anyway, the whole point is to spotlight a cool business to go to. Client testimonials is something else that you could do. You could highlight community events, maybe sports team schedules.
Right.
Things to do in your hometown. So this is something I've been wanting to do forever. I have a list of like 100 things that are cool that you could do in Las Vegas. Well, we're only talking, guys, here about one a month. That's 12 things to go out and do. So the Smith Center is one I want to spotlight, the cool things that you can do around the Smith Center. Something that's on my list is going and visiting. I tried to take you the last time you were here. So maybe when you come out here, we'll do this together. It's visiting the Neon Boneyard
I would love to do that. Yeah.
Right. And maybe do that when the lights are starting to come on at dusk. But anyway, it's things like that that you could then say, here's some things you can go do with your family in your hometown. That I think is interesting, right? Hey, did you know a restaurant review? So you get the idea. You're doing a local newsletter. Now, this takes a little bit of work. We're only talking about doing it one time a month. And I just know that it's going to keep you top of mind. So you don't just send it to your client, your client database. You send it to people that are prospects that you're developing so that they're starting to, over time, we do a lot of lead generation in our company and on our individual team. And we're up to several thousand people that we've generated from Facebook advertising. Yep. These people are 6 months to a year out. So I believe, and we're already seeing results from this since last year, that if you have this very nice balance of not bothering people too much, but you've got to stay connected and attempt to talk to them and let them know we're ready when you are, I think a newsletter like this is perfect for what's cool about living here. If they already live here, you're reminding them of the things that they don't even go out and check in their own hometown. If they're coming from another place, you're sharing what it's like to live, work, play in your community. Okay, so the last thing, I think you get the idea here, get creative. You don't have to load 20 things in here. I'm obviously giving you ideas of a blend of real estate plus local community, but how do you get video? How do you have some fun? How do you bring value to your database? And how do you get them wanting to open your newsletter? All right, so let's talk about reality here. Matt, talk to me for a minute, because you always look at the stats. It depends on but we do things for WBNL coaching, for recruiting, for Home Connect America. What are generally the open rates?
The typical open rate for anything real estate related is remarkably low. It's like 17 to 23%, really at the high side for just typical stuff that goes out. We've been having really higher success with our stuff, and I think a lot of it has to do with what you've been talking about, Jan, the content and the look and feel of what we're doing. But ours sometimes gets up to 30, even 40% sometimes, which that's really on the high side. But they are much higher than industry averages, and I really believe the reason for that is a couple things, like Jan's been talking about: consistency and the product that we're actually giving, going through. Can I take just a minute to kind of talk about just the layout of the new, how I would suggest?
Oh, please, yes.
Yeah, first of all, she was talking about doing it once a month, and that's the perfect frequency. The hard part is going to be doing it the first time, because you're going to want to set up your template. Once you have a template design that you are happy with, and you know that you're going to be able to fulfill on a monthly basis, you're kind of done with that. Every other month after that, it's just copy the last template and then drag and drop the new content in, which is really easy. But I would suggest not mixing your templates up. I would suggest keeping the same type of stuff in the same order. And this is why. You will find that clients are probably going to resonate with maybe one thing in there. And maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's your market update. Maybe it's whatever it is. They might, if they know it's in the same place, they will scroll immediately to that place. The thing is, they're going to be scrolling by and through everything else in your newsletter. And at some point, something else is going to catch their eye. And that way, you are going to get them to move into other parts, and they'll find the whole thing more beneficial. And with that in mind, as far as links, you need links to your personal website or wherever you want to drive them, that's going to get them to you and into your contact database even more, all over that newsletter. So you don't just have one call to action, because it will get lost, because they're not looking to call you, or get to you. But you need multiple places throughout your newsletter to get them to you, and that will be, and they won't click on all of them, but they'll click on one of them. And as they get used to the format, you have a better chance of going through there. So that's those are my biggest tips. Keep it the same. Keep it to where they feel comfortable with it. It's like, hey, here's the newsletter. I'm going to go see what's happening in the town, this week. I'm going to see what new deals are out there. And if you pepper your call to actions and your links back in there, you will find success.
So I love this idea of consistency in the layout, and that's working within we've been doing over a year, the newsletter to the company. And so I have a couple ideas here that maybe we could even implement around the fact that 15 to 30% is going to be the open rate for newsletter, just because people are inundated with email. And that is because that's with people that know you. If it's a colder list, you're not going to get that kind of open rate. So of course, always you have to have a compelling headline. So you have to remind them, like, here is your local, your hometown newsletter from Jan O'Brien, right? Let them know that that's what the subject is, because people scroll, right? So that's first thing. The other thing is, and I want to think about how we could do this, Matt, internally. And we already do it. So we already do it for our recruiting, because it's about creating the content as a blog post. So you take your local newsletter, because not everybody's going to open their email. But what if you should all have a blog on your website? Take the content, put it into a blog format. Now, if you have a text ability, you can text everybody in your database, hey, the January newsletter is dropped. Click here to go check out all the great content and get your discount from our local business spotlight. Our business of the month is X, and they're offering this great thing. Something compelling to get them to go to your website. Now, what's cool about that is they're on your website, checking out the blog post with all the great content, and now they can go look at houses and do other things. Then you can, of course, put it on social media and post it and say, hey, go check out the newsletter for the month, blah, blah, blah. And so that's another way. And we need to think about how to get people in our own company to look at the newsletter by maybe texting and saying, hey, the newsletter is posted, or maybe we put it somewhere in the back end. I just thought of that as we were going through all this. All right, so I'm very excited about this idea. We've already seen it in action. We're just going to take it to the level of creating a local newsletter for real estate specific to our team. And we'll keep you posted on how well that works for us. Okay, but what we are going to get the notes. Everything I just talked about is over in the show notes. And the other thing we will put in there is some samples, especially when I get our team newsletter done with the specific real estate stuff. We'll put some samples of what we've already been sending out. All right, that's it, Matt.
Good stuff.
Come take my hand and see the world around you. The time is right, just let the light surround you. And step by step you feel it coming alive, the feeling deep down inside.
The best memories are made when you take the road less traveled. Visit wanderingbutnotlost.com for some inspiration.
Today on Wandering Zen, we are going back to the Big Apple, and we are going to take a little boat ride over to Ellis Island to explore the island and really take a hard hat tour of the hospital that was actually built on the island. We did it for the first time, the hard hat tour. Absolutely fascinating. And I'm looking forward to sharing my some stories behind that, as well as if you go over to the show notes over at WBNLpodcast.com or wanderingButNotLost.com, you'll get to see some pretty incredible pictures of the actual hospital itself, interior and exterior shots. Before we start all that, though, Jan O'Brien, when you think of Ellis Island, what comes to your mind? What do you think about when you think of Ellis Island?
It's immigration. It's just people moving here. I mean, my relatives came to Ellis Island. I actually have some stuff for my sister does the ancestry stuff.
Right.
You can see that from Newfoundland, Ireland to Newfoundland to come in, and the records in Ellis Island.
That's really interesting.
I didn't even know there's a hospital there. What do you mean?
Well, that's the thing, and I want to go into all of that, right? Ellis Island actually didn't open until 1892, and it really ran from 1892 to 1954, and 12 million people immigrated through Ellis Island during those years. So that's a phenomenal number of people, especially back then. You have to think the world population wasn't 7 billion like it is today, so 12 million was a big number back in during those times back then. I always had this idea of Ellis Island as being, I don't know, because you see the pictures of all of the thousands of people, just kind of the huddled masses, right? Yearning to be free. But I always had this image of it being somewhat horrible. And I'm not saying that those conditions were great, because there were way too many people there. But I just had this feeling that people were mistreated. And I'm sure that some of that probably went on. But when you go to Ellis Island and you hear the stories, particularly of this hospital, you get a whole different frame of reference, I think. And I like I had mentioned earlier when we were starting the show, this tour was one of the best tours I had ever been on. It was really fascinating. But getting back to some stats really quickly here, 12 million came through during that period of time.
But what's the time period again? Like over how much time?
1892 to 1954. So we're talking really 60 years, of time there in our history. 12 million came through, like I had mentioned. 40% of native-born Americans, 40% have an ancestor that actually came through Ellis Island. And obviously you're one of the 40%. I am not. My people came over other ways, or actually before Ellis Island came into the picture. So it's interesting. When we started our tour that day, he asked that question. Our tour guide asked that question.
Can you go see? Can you guys look at the records?
Well, you know what? It's funny. We didn't spend much time in actually looking at that part of Ellis Island. We just went for the hard hat tour.
Yeah,
and we're going to go back. It's funny. It's so, Ellis Island and Statue of Liberty are fascinating and really interesting things. You could spend days there, literally, if you're really going to, get in and do it. We've been to Liberty Island, did the statue, went up inside, walked around. It was awesome. We went to Ellis Island that same day, and we didn't have much time because we had other things to do that night over in the city. So we came back. This time we went to Ellis Island, did the hard hat tour, and we still didn't spend much time over there. So we have to go back again to really explore the actual, the immigration building that looks so familiar to so many people when they think of Ellis Island, because the hospital's away from that a little bit. Anyway, so 40%. So we asked that question, and about 40% of our tour raised their hand. So it was really, he said, this absolutely represents the percentage of people that would have gone through. And he goes, and surprisingly enough, this is typical of every time I ask that question. That is just the way it usually all rolls out there. So I found that to be interesting. 10% of the people that went to Ellis Island were deemed to have some sort of illness and couldn't be let into the United States. So they had to have a place to put, or to help these people that were not feeling well. So what they did was they created a little hospital there at the island. And if they came in and they had the way it happened is you would arrive at the place, there would be a almost like just a visual screening of people. And they would have X amount of doctors all lined up. People would come through. And if they were deemed to be sick in some way, they would get the little white chalk mark on their clothing.
Oh,
and they would be sent over to the hospital to, for further examination to figure out what was going on with them and how, diagnose them and see what their next steps were going to be. It became very obvious very early on that the hospital they had there on the main island was not going to be enough to house the people that were coming in that were sick. So what they ended up doing, actually in 1882, I believe was the year, there was an immigration bill that was passed through the federal government that really started kind of locking down immigration. Before 1892, you might ask, before Ellis Island was there, where did immigrants enter the United States? Well, they entered in New York, and it was run by the city of New York. And if they were sick then, they would go to hospitals either on Long Island or in New York City. And that's how they took care of the issue. Government got into it in 1882 to kind of take over that process. And that's where Ellis Island was actually brought into the situation. They had really two objectives. They had the objectives of identifying people that had diseases. And then if it was something that was so infectious or so contagious, to actually block them from entering into the United States and to actually send them back to their native country. So that was the deportation part. Well, it's not even really deportation because they were never really here in the first place. They only got there and then they had to go home.
Do you think it was a high number of that just because of the journey, the treacherous sort of journey, because they're coming over on ships and stuff, right?
So here's
that's the issue.
So remember this. Remember the stats here. 10% of the people were considered, sick. Too sick to enter the country. Only 2% of that 12 million, well, actually, it's even less than that because 12 million came through. 2% of the people that came to Ellis Island were actually ever sent back to their native countries, which to me was lower than I ever thought it was, because I just had this vision.
Getting them back to health. Is that all it was?
Actually, that's what it was all about.
Recover from the journey, or you were ill, or whatever.
That's exactly right. So I found that to be really kind of just
refreshing.
Yeah. Well, it was refreshing because I had a different view a different picture in my head. So anyway, went through all that, and it was the stories that we heard during the tour were fascinating because there were some personal things and personal stories of people that were there. But before we did even go down that path, let me talk a little bit about the tour itself. The hard hat tour, there's about 20 people that go on that tour altogether. So it's a very small tour. So you get to ask questions. It's real personal and intimate. It's fantastic. They book up. So you have to make your reservations early. We made our reservations a couple months early.
Wow, really?
And still didn't get the time frame that we really wanted to do. The tour is an hour and a half long. You do wear a hard hat because the hospital buildings are in very bad shape. I mean, when you're walking through there, you're like, oh, what's going to fall on me next? And, can I go through the floor in this spot? But it's not really that bad, but you do kind of get that sense. This is the interesting thing that I found when we were going. Our tour actually started at 1:00, and they instructed us to be down at Liberty, down at the dock or the port there at the foot of the island at 11. And I thought to myself, wow, 2 hours before, that's incredible. But, you have to go through screening and everything to get, onto the boat to get over to the island. So you get there, you're standing in this big old long line to get on, to go through your security inspection, and you get on the boat. The boat first goes to Liberty Island, and a lot of people get off there. Actually, most people get off there. And then some people will go over to Ellis Island themselves, and you get over there. And by that time, I mean, literally almost an hour and a half had passed. That's how long it took us to get from New York City through security on the boat ride and then over to Liberty Island. And one of the first things our docent said after he, figured out how many of us actually might have had answers that come through there, asked us how long it took to actually get over here and how we felt coming over to the island. And he said that experience was really not unlike what most people would feel like when they were coming. Now, obviously, you were on a boat for weeks coming over, from across. But
you got a tiny little
whole idea. This I found to be kind of a fascinating statistic. On average, back in the day, 5,000 people came through Ellis Island on any given day. 5,000 people. With 3 million people visiting Ellis Island today, and if you kind of just do the quick math on that, that's 8,200 people going to Ellis Island every day. There's more people going through there now than there was back when Ellis Island was actually operating. So yes, it's very much the same feeling as what it was like back then. There's
queuing up and waiting.
Yeah, there's more people around there. I just thought, just when you put it into perspective like that, I think it was really fascinating.
Wow.
Anyway, the hard hat tour. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about how the hospital came to be in the first place. Ellis Island was built. They had that small hospital there, like I had mentioned earlier. It was getting overrun. They decided they needed more hospital space because the whole purpose of this was to kind of quarantine these people from everybody else. They decided they would build a second island next to Ellis Island. They decided that it needed to be at least 410 feet. The buildings need to be 410 feet apart. There needed to be 200 feet of open water space between the buildings.
How do you build an island?
Well, it's all landfill.
Oh my God.
All landfill out there, in the water out there, crossing the state, because you can see the Statue of Liberty from there. So they build a little island there. It's just a little thing. When you're out there looking at it, if you didn't see that little tiny space of water between, you wouldn't even think about it being another island, but it actually is it was a separate island. So Liberty, Ellis Island, the main building is on island number 1. Island number 2 was the hospital structure that was built in there, and that opened in 1907, I believe, is when 1901 or 1902. I'm getting my numbers all mixed up. Early 1900s when the actual hospital built.
I'll take it.
They put that together. They had a general hospital there. I don't know how many beds were in there, but it was functioning just fine. But they were filling that up as well. They built a second building on that particular island that had more beds to it. It became obvious that there were some people that were coming over that were, maybe a little bit insane and needed a little bit more intense. So they actually have a building over there that is for that. I have a picture in the show notes of that. Super creepy. It's like an institution. It's all boarded up. Bars on the windows and everything, where they would put the people that were clearly going back home and not probably going to get well. They had a maternity ward there because there were over 335 babies were born on Ellis Island. They found that there were a number of people that were coming in with, contagious diseases. Tuberculosis was one of the big ones. So they decided to build a contagious, infectious, ward. They built the third island, island number 3, that they built. It was more of a pavilion style place. Absolutely fascinating back in that time, how they built this hospital, because, they didn't have the drugs and the cures that we have now for these diseases. It was mainly sunlight and air. That was what people were given. So, in order for disease and germs not to spread, the rooms in these places were offset. So, now if you go to a hospital, there's just doors and there's rooms everywhere. Sure. You don't even really think about it. Here, there's these big, huge, long brick hallways, and the rooms are all set apart. So the germs can't come right out the door and go across the hall into the other room.
Absolutely. That worked.
Well, it did work. I mean, it really did work if you think about it. If 10% of the people were actually sick at some point and only 2% were sent back, it did work to a certain degree.
It helped, yeah.
And the rooms were, and it was all, kind of dormitory type. It wasn't private rooms, clearly, right? Dormitory type of situations where like diseases were put together. But the way that they had the ventilation and the window settings in all of these rooms, absolutely fascinating. I do have some pictures in the show notes and then links also to a lot of things where you can do some more research on this, because I found the whole thing to be incredible. The thing that I also found, I don't know why I found this interesting or surprising, but this hospital was actually top-notch hospital. This was one of the finest hospitals in the United States, in its kind of hospital group. It wasn't like a slim shot, let's just throw things at it. They had cutting facilities, cutting edge staff that was there, including some of the first female physicians to be in the United States hospital system. Cool. Yeah, which was super cool. And it was really, really incredibly well done. A lot of things that they had put into the design and the care of their methodology was from Florence Nightingale. I mean, her name came up a number of times on the tour itself. So really cutting edge stuff. And it was a really top-notch place to be, which like I said, I don't know why I just had this doom and gloom surrounding my thought about Ellis Island itself, but not at all. It wasn't like that at all. They really took care of their people. There was one room in particular that I found to be absolutely kind of just like heart-wrenching. This was the room in that contagious disease area where the people were just clearly never going to get better, and maybe not die, but clearly we're not going to be coming to America. And when you got put into that area, you pretty much knew that you were going home. And he told this story about a woman who was laying in her bed, and out the window is the Statue of Liberty. Mm. And the way the island is positioned, the way the statue is positioned from that point, you kind of see the back of it. And the woman said, "Lady Liberty is walking away from me."
Oh my God.
Oh, I could cry.
That is heart-wrenching.
So incredible. I have a picture of that in the show notes of that window and what it looks like. But I mean, it was so funny because everyone got into that room and we were talking about it. And I had gone over to that window. I'm like, oh my God, that's really, I saw the Statue of Liberty, immediately when I was there, and I was over taking pictures of it. And I didn't connect that until he said that. And I was like, holy crap.
Can you imagine? It's like you're coming in from wherever and right. That's the symbol, right? That's the amazing symbol of what you're coming to, right, for all the opportunity, the land of opportunity, and have a better life for you and your family. And wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. I've never even visited I've only seen the Statue of Liberty on one of the little harbor tours. I've never even gone to see that like this, let alone go to Ellis Island. This is definitely something
it's absolutely a fascinating tour of the Statue of Liberty too. So there was that room. The tour took us around to different places within the hospital itself, and then around the grounds of the hospital. The hospital, Ellis Island, the main building itself is run by the National Park Service. The hospital actually is run by, and I've got to find this on my notes because I don't know what the name of the, it's the Save Ellis Island Foundation. And they, I guess that should have been easy to remember. Anyway, they are responsible for restoring the hospital, and the money that the tour from the tours actually all goes towards preservation of the hospital. And right now they have only one room that is completely redone where it's actually heated again. I mean, we were there in November and it was really cold that day. I mean, we were full on scarves, hard hat, scarves, and jackets when we were walking through there, because most of it was just freezing cold because you're right out there on the water. But one room is starting to be heated. They'll get that done eventually, but it's through donations and tour proceeds that are actually helping the hospital get redone, so they can tell, the really amazing story of the hospital itself. I just have to say, I could not recommend this tour enough. Wow. What had happened to Ellis Island, once Ellis Island, well, actually, during its operation, during World War II, the island was shut down to immigration, because there really wasn't much immigration during World War II, because everybody was doing their thing, right? And it was used during wartime as a military hospital as well. After that, after it finally closed down, it really pretty much is just set dormant for all of these years. So you can imagine
it becomes a landmark and a park and all that.
You can imagine the decay that has happened in that place. And there were some really interesting shots. We got through some broken windows out into the harbor. It's interesting, but they will slowly and surely get that the island, rejuvenated and back to its glory. The buildings are absolutely beautiful, or I think they are anyway. The Ellis Island building itself is a kind of a French island or French Renaissance style of a building. The architect for that, I have to find that. I thought that was interesting. They had a contest where's my notes on that? A contest to have the building done. Oh, Tilton and Boring were the people that won the architectural contest, and they did a French Renaissance style for that. The hospital kind of mirrors that. It's not quite as ornate as the main building, but the architecture is really, really beautiful as well. So much to learn and see and do over there. When they were trying to decide what they were going to do with that, there was actually a plan at some point to turn that into a Sheraton hotel and convention space.
Get out.
Thank God they didn't do that. There were a couple national historic preservation societies that put that island or those islands on the list of the 100th most historic places on Earth that are in danger. And eventually that came around, and that's how it kind of got into the place.
What's the time frame? So in the 54? When was it not the immigration spot anymore?
Yeah, 54 it went away. So
and then how long before the historical preservation people or the park, when did that all start happening?
Actually 96 actually that's how long it sat there. It sat there just under government control, rotting away.
No way. Nobody could see it until the 90s?
Yeah, actually it was even later than that. I don't think the hard hat tours has really started until just the last few years.
You've always been able to go to Liberty Island, of course.
Yeah, you could go to Liberty Island. You could always go to Ellis Island, because that was been open for a long time.
But you can't get to the hospitals.
But you couldn't get to the hospital. Yeah. You still can't randomly roam that. I would assume.
No, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all hard hat.
You have to sign up for these very small tours, and I got it.
Yeah, it was funny when we were there. He kept talking about island number 2 and island number 3, and now what they have done, they have filled in that gap between the two islands, so they aren't two separate islands. Because I kept thinking, why are they saying this? There's no separate island here. And island 1 and island 2 actually attached now. There's actually land between them, so it's not like 3 separate islands now. But it's fascinating the way it was set up. It's fascinating what they were able to do with the technology and the wherewithal they had at the time. And I just love the fact that it was so cutting edge, and it was a teaching hospital. Really, they have this area in there. Actually, it was in the morgue, where they had a theater type of seating where doctors would actually come in and they would hold classes at the hospital. So, I mean, it wasn't just they're immigrants, whatever, not like that at all. It was, we are welcoming you into our country. We're going to take care of you as much as we possibly can. So if you are in New York City, you make sure that you go to the National Park website. You check out the Ellis Island Hard Hat Tour. I absolutely recommend it more than, like I said, just about any tour I've ever been. I think that it ran about $65, $70. So it's a little bit pricey, but just know that your money is going towards preservation of the hospital itself, which is a really cool thing. So go to the show notes, a lot of great pictures, a lot more information. Check that out and put that on your list.
Awesome.
And at the end of the day, no one can stand in your way. Just listen, hear what I say. You know you gotta climb higher, climb
That's a wrap for episode 101 of the Wandering But Not Lost podcast, where real estate and reality meet. Go over to our show notes over at wbnlpodcast.com. Gianna Bryan, I'm looking forward to continuing to build the whole HyperLocal newsletter thing. Every time we work on this kind of project, it gets better and better and better.
Totally. We already have it on different levels for different purposes. We've been using newsletter type formats for our coaching follow-up. We're using it in our company. Now we're going to take it down to the level that the listeners that are real estate agents, I really hope you find and take the time to do it. So one thing on that, when you were talking about the layout, the template and stuff is great, but it does require some time to go build the content. The content doesn't magically happen. So my recommendation on that is just schedule time. You make it a system. So once a month, you're taking an hour or two, you're going to go get those videos, you're going to write the content. And I really believe if you take the time to do that, then you'll reap the benefits overall, and it won't be some boring newsletter that you get from some subscription place that has a recipe in it and some national statistical stuff that nobody really cares about. So
I'm telling you, if you really build that out to what it's something you can be really proud of when you have it done. You know what I mean? If you get the content right and you're getting some response from it, it's not really a chore every month when you do it. It's actually kind of fun to build.
I'm looking forward to it. I told Cosmo, our partner for the real estate team, to go out, that I wanted to take charge of this. Now I'm enrolling you to help me, Matt Emerson. But the reality is, I look forward to, once a month, I could take Charlie maybe to go do some of these things. We could go have an adventure, get the videos and photos and build some little content around something fun to go do with family members or kids. And we're only talking about one a month. I might try to do it twice a month and have some stuff built up that we can put in there. So yeah, looking forward to it. So there it is, episode 101. I think we figured out the bugs. We will not have any more issues, right, Matt Emerson?
Hey, never say never.
We'll know what to go check. It's the simple things, people, like a microphone being off, as I said at the top of the show. We won't have that problem. What a frustration. We're about to quit. I'm so glad we didn't quit. We're going to go back to our audio. We're like, no, we're going to figure this out. We tried 3 different browsers. We tried
they have a word. They have a word for people that try to quit.
What's that?
Quitters.
We're not quitters here.
No.
All right, so we'll see you next week in the Wandering But Not Lost podcast.
And remember, everyone, be forever wandering but not lost.